Today we're joined by John Amaechi and Alex Forsyth, who we heard from earlier, and we'll be covering the promises of giants. So John and Alex, over to you.
Hi John, welcome. Thank you for coming today to our conference to talk to us about your new book, The Promises of Giants. And before I delve into that, John, I just wanted to ask you, I'm Irish, as you probably gathered, and we have a very strong culture of oral history and storytelling. And you, to me, are a good storyteller. And I guess I wanted to ask you a little bit about that as your approach and what role you think storytelling plays in influencing leaders and in persuasion.
Hi, Alex. It's been way too long, by the way. Storytelling. I'm trying to avoid the kind of poncy, overly ridiculous statements, but it's like the essence of everything. But we've had this conversation before about what the job of psychologist is. And this narrative, this ability to tell a story, to drag people's minds and emotions into your narrative with the idea that you're taking them somewhere important, that you're telling them this story about yourself or about an experience or about something you heard, with the idea that it brings people to a better, more elevated place. I love storytelling. There's an Asimov book, and I can't remember which it was, but I read it as a kid, and I remember it's two robots talking to each other. One has violated the 3 laws and so is dying, and is now passing on its programming by speaking to the other robot. And the other robot in the narrative talks about how, as the robot talks to him, it can feel its programming changing and shifting in its mind. And that, to me, is that's what great therapy is. It's what great psychologizing is, and it's what great storytelling is.
Do you think, but to some extent, you have to be prepared to open yourself up to that kind of? Well, we'll talk about vulnerability in a moment, because I know it's something that you're passionate about, but giving of yourself and trusting that others will be interested.
Yeah.
Some perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, you have to rely on the fact that you are, telling a story in a certain way can make it more compelling, but you have to rely on the fact that people are willing to engage with and believe that what you have to say is worth listening to, is worth engaging with, is worth jumping in and coming along on the ride with, which means I think the best storytellers are willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to disclose about themselves things that would act as hooks for the listener.
Which is a different message perhaps than what historically leaders have been trained to do, which is to be, a part and not part of, the environment that you don't share.
Yeah, I never understand why people find this a difficult contrast. There is absolutely a need for a certain type of professional distance, a contextual professional distance. But this period of time that we've been through, COVID, Brexit, the whole business, should have taught people. If we listen to the comms, if we watch the comms that have come out of organizations, that language is not of professional distance. That language is of empathy, of seeing colleagues as real people, of connecting, of disclosing. And that's where we've gone to. So no longer can leaders be these aloof, separate people who pretend to be invincible, who pretend to be invulnerable, who pretend to be omniscient and know everything. That's just no good anymore.
Do you think that psychologists might be frightened of that? If I contextualize, where I suppose it's that if you think about, clinical psychology training, for example, where you're supposed to be sort of almost superhuman, you're not supposed to share with the client. There's an element of if I share, therefore I'm not objective, and I'm supposed to be objective.
Yeah, I'm not sure what part of, how are you objective? No, I'm not going to dive into that one. I don't know that human beings relate to people who are superhuman. We like the idea of watching them on films. I'm not sure we'd like the idea of having them as our confidants, as the people who are, because how can you possibly imagine that someone who is impervious to harm, could understand your anxiety? How could you possibly believe that someone who has never had to be fearful because they are invulnerable would understand your pain? I think people, without having to disclose everything about yourself, I think there is an appropriate psychologist sharing, an appropriate amount of disclosure, and that is different based on context. But it can be so vital as long as it's used for the client, not for the psychologist. We're not disclosing because it makes us feel good. We're disclosing because it's essential for this to be effective.
So your book, what was your motivation for writing this book, and who do you hope will read it?
Now you sound like the editor. That's what the question they asked me at the beginning. So I have a higgledy-piggledy mind that finds it hard to my stories can be stories within stories, and I needed to find a way to write it down so that regular non-weird people could understand what I was trying to say. And so that's what the book was. How can I create something that is kind of, at least in this moment, because I'm sure my ideas will evolve, but at least in this moment is a good assessment of where I am on what leadership is in a very practical sense, as opposed to a high-level theoretical sense. How do we do it better in the context of the world we live in right now, as disrupted and crazy as it is? Who will lead it? Who will read it? I hope that named leaders will read it. I hope that people who have led organizations but realize that their approach and skills are no longer good enough, I'm hoping they will read it. I'm hoping that the myriad of unnamed leaders, those brilliant people within organizations who others look to but don't necessarily have a title that facilitates that, will see it as an enabler. And I'm hoping that people who lead organizations will see this as a kind of book that they'd want their named leaders across the organization, especially new leaders, to read, so that they recognize their job is not just resource management. Their job is not just the Gantt chart and the project, but it's actually the welfare in the broadest sense of our people, of our colleagues, the thriving of individuals, both in the sense of the work they have to produce and their lives. That's what I'm hoping.
And were there any significant psychologists that influenced your thinking on some of the subject matter that you cover?
Probably Adam Grant is probably the biggest name that people would know. He was incredibly kind about the book, but also we've talked in the background, and I think he helped me. Well, the book was finished by the time I really talked to him, but I talked to him and then went back because I thought, how do I make this more transparent? And he's obviously very good at writing books that any person, no matter where they are from, can read. And I don't think my books are technically difficult. I think they are sometimes circuitous, and they force people to kind of run with me through what feels like a maze at times in my head. And so I tried to make it a bit simpler, but I think most people are saying that
that's where your storytelling comes in. It's that you can get you make complicated concepts feel intuitive and easy because of the storytelling, I would say, that comes with your style.
I appreciate that. I think that's what I'm trying to achieve. I think the problem I have is that I can't tell how weird I am when my brain is doing its thing. It's hard for me to tell if this is normal for people to follow along with, or if it's really odd. And so it's useful to have people say, actually, you've now wrapped 3 stories inside one. And so then Adam said, perhaps not that, perhaps 2 stories, and stick this one somewhere else. So that at least was really useful for me.
Well, I mean, on influencers and profound stories, your mother seems to have been someone that was profoundly influential in your life. And I was wondering if you would talk to the listeners and tell them the story behind finding your soul in the dark and what that means, for leaders.
Yeah, I think somebody asked me very early on, actually, what's the best thing about the book? What's the best thing about the book for a reader? And I would say, for those of you who might get it and might read it, the best thing about it is that you'll meet my mum. You'll meet my mum in this book. When I was growing up, I used to to spend a huge amount of time with her, as much as I could anyway. And there was a point when I decided I was going to play basketball in the NBA, and I was a fat 17-year-old kid in Stockport. So it's an unlikely, improbable journey. And that was the point where she talked to me about Soul in the Dark, which is, I think, in the first or the second chapter of the book, so people can explore it there. But it was the idea that I told her I was going to do this really improbable thing, and she looked at me and said, "Son, would you recognize your soul in the dark?" Which was really frustrating. As a 17-year-old, what I really wanted is straight answers. Tell me straight answers, and she didn't. And then she kind of explained that most people in this world, no matter how accomplished, spend their entire life deciding what they want to do. And they spend very little time exploring who they are. And she said, for people who are going to do ordinary things, and by that she wasn't being pejorative. She didn't mean mundane. She didn't mean dull, uninteresting things, but things that have a standard pathway. That's less important to get there. But if you're trying to do something that no one's ever done before, something that no one has conceived of before from your position, then all the ways that we can sabotage ourselves, all the ways that we can hide from ourselves, all the ways that we can, harbor things that will inhibit us with our ignorance about ourselves needs to be eliminated. And that's with the Soul in the Dark, that other people would recognize you distinctly. So not just about your height or your skin color, or your glasses or your job or your relationships with other people, but the essence of who you are. And that was a journey. I mean, I'm still on it, but I think that's one of the things that has helped me to do things that others thought improbable.
So effectively, when I would talk about myself, I start with my PhD, my qualifications. I'm a woman. Take all of that away and get down to the guts of who you are as a human. Yeah. And then use that as a trampoline, if you like, to do everything else.
It's exactly right. I've done that process with people so many times, and we do it with our colleagues here at APS Intelligence. We do it with our colleagues because we want people to really know themselves, so others can get to know them, not just for their job description. You're a business psychologist, you're a trainer, you're a BD person, but for you. And so we ask people to, what are these 3 things that you might think of? So for me, one of mine is, because I'm a nerd, is nerd. And what that means to me it's something I find attractive in other people, this idea that they have this geeky, nerdy tendency. And then perspicacity, which is a word that I love because it's so precise, but this idea that people with those minds, you meet those people and their minds are so eviscerative that they can take a nebulous, hard to understand problem, and you can watch as they slice it up in front of you so it's understandable, not just for them, but for everybody else. It's like, that is the sexiest brain in the world. And I want more people like that around me. I think it's so helpful when you know that.
And, can you give any kind of tips or steps to people to kind of start to access that sense of themselves, because you've taken away their kind of armor, if you like?
Yeah. Alex, this is a good point. It can feel a little disarming initially because a lot of the stuff about us, all this extra stuff feels very, especially our job titles and roles, they feel quite as if they are a scaffold for us. And so we remove them and we wonder if we can still stand, but we can. So the process is, it's a pretty simple process. It is, think about how you describe yourself naturally. And so that's where you come up with most of the stuff. I'm 6'9", I'm heavy, I'm black, I'm short-sighted, I'm a psychologist, I'm a brother, I am a son, all of these things. I pick all these labels. And then the process is to remove all the things that are simply blunt descriptors and start again and think about how you respond in different circumstances. How do you respond under stress? What are the things that instantly attract you to other people? These kind of questions, which are a bit more esoteric and force you to really think. It's actually quite hard because some people realize then when they look around their friendship group, it is actually based on these other more superficial labels. It's not based on necessarily the more interesting elements of themselves or the things that really, really matter.
I mean, just linking to that point, you talk about a study in your book about how they looked at how people presume themselves to be biased or racist, and then you get that they also talk about how they think other people see racist and the language that's used. I would like you to explain to the listeners a little bit more about that study, but it did make me wonder if you could actually take away your own armor and look more deeply at yourself. Would that improve how people view others?
I am positive that many of the ideas we have about ourselves that are either uninteresting, superficial, or unfounded color how we view other people. Human beings broadly, this is one of those things that just is, you start off like that, it makes you immediately sound like an arse. But anyway, human beings broadly, I think, have a deep need to be innocent, to feel innocent, and to feel fair. And so if you've not really considered who you are, oftentimes we'll contrive to think about others in a way that makes us feel the most innocent and the most fair. As we look at people who are rough sleepers, we have to contrive that they must have done something to deserve that fate. Otherwise, we realize there's an implication for us and the world that we have agreed to live in that has created this system of inequity. Same thing for women and others who might experience differential treatment. I think people do need to know themselves better in order to be able to more effectively judge, in the non-judgmental sense of that term, assess the people around them. The study that you talked about, 18,000 people. We've asked 18,000 people in healthcare, professional services, technology, engineering, almost every sector that APS Intelligence works in. We've asked them across Beijing and Shanghai, Berlin and Tablet, London, Manchester, across North America, Canada and North America and the United States. What 3 words do you associate with a group of people? Women, people with disabilities, gay people, etc., black people. And the answers are remarkably consistent wherever you go in the world. It's kind of horrifying, but the answers are remarkably consistent. When you look at the, for women, for example, I'm just trying to pull up and see if I can find the actual word so I don't get it wrong for you. But let me see. Oh, here we go. For women, the top 5 words for women across the world, 18,000 educated, smart people: weak, emotional, gossip, bossy, annoying. Weak, emotional, gossip, bossy, annoying. Those are the top.
Mother was in there quite high up as well. Mother was on both sides as well, positive and negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Mother is high up there. The reason that we in the as we display it, we tend, because we normally do it the other way around. We normally say, what do these 5 words mean? Mother, I think, is the 4th word, actually. Mm-hmm. We pull it out because when we do it the other way around, we say, what gender is the person that you think of? Normally, by the same you say weak and emotional, it's a woman. You add gossip, it's definitely a woman. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world. It doesn't matter how woke you are. You will think that. For black people, the indisputable top word is criminal. Athletic, music, gangs. It's a really terrible picture, but that's in everybody's mind, and in part because it's a convenience for people if they can imagine that the circumstances of women, from Sarah Everard through to the person being harassed in their job, is in some part because of this picture of women that has some validity. I would point out that after those top words, including mother, comes a bunch of words that are a lot more ugly, and they are mostly to do with sex, being a housewife, being a sex object, being domestic, cleaning, sexual favors. Those are the words that come next. So you can imagine it's very easy then. People wonder, where's the world? How do we get to this world where people ask, what were you wearing, to someone who is assaulted in the street? And we get there because this cloud, this identity pollution, sits as a lens that we see women through. We've got to lighten the mood now. We've got to lighten the mood.
Okay, we need to lighten the room. Vulnerability. I'm not. It sounds like we're not lightening the room, but actually, I think it's an important concept that needs to be picked. It's largely overlooked. We keep talking about resilience and coping, but vulnerability, for me, as I said in my opening speech, vulnerability rocks. Speak to me about vulnerability, John.
Yes, I love vulnerability. I don't love it on its own. I love it in combination with boldness. Right? I think vulnerability on its own, taken to its nth degree, can be meek and can underserve people. I think as a functional adult element of our psyche is really important. I think when you mix it with boldness, it can be a really powerful 1-2 punch. Boldness on its own, to me, can be to its nth degree reckless. And I don't want that either. In the context of leadership, I talk about vulnerability being so important because many leaders, if they were to picture themselves as an animal, as a sea animal, it would be a shark, a big, great white shark. They would imagine themselves this omnipotent apex predator moving through the ocean. And I know that that's attractive to some leaders. I don't, for the life of me, ever want that. But, you know, big teeth, scary, nothing can touch you. It just seems so good. And then you realize, but look at the followers that attracts. If you've ever seen The Blue Planet or any of those kind of things, if you ever see a big shark in the ocean, you'll see that they're covered in these little tiny fish called remora. They've got suckers on their head and they just attach. But that's the kind of follower that invulnerable, omniscient leaders attract. People who are going to just attach onto you with suckers, eat the scraps, and never contribute. If someone is invulnerable, why would you ever think you have to step up? Why would you ever think you have to contribute? And we don't want that. Vulnerable leaders is contextual, right? It's not that I don't know anything, I'm completely at the mercy. No. But in being able to say in environments, you know what, Alex, in this particular environment, can you take this? Because I think you've got better expertise here. That contextual leadership, that requires vulnerability. The vulnerability was saying, you know what, I thought I had all the answers, but we've been met by this barrage of disruption, and I don't now. Can I bring people in? Really need you to contribute. That's the future. I know some traditional leaders are rejecting that, but that is the future.
And I suppose, speaking about vulnerability, you talk quite a lot about your experiences, good and bad, when you were at school, and how you find it difficult to integrate your view of yourself with the views of others. And actually, I've heard other highly successful psychologists discuss something similar. So, for example, Walter Mischel and Carrie Cooper both said that, that anti-Semitism was an enormously deliberate, debilitating factor when they were growing up, but even more so because they were achievement orientated. And you talk about yourself as being a smart kid, and I just wondered if you would feel that you could speak a bit to that, about that tension between you're being stereotyped into a culture, but also you're smart and you want to succeed. Because I think there are pockets of our at work where you see that, where people are being put down, if you like, when they want to achieve.
Yeah, I think firstly it was the juxtaposition in school. It was the idea that I was the nerdy kid with NHS specs and a briefcase. I was the only kid in school who had a briefcase, and that wasn't what I was supposed to be, because I was a black kid and I was a big fat black kid, and so I was supposed to be either kind of interested in sports, specifically rugby, and dim, uninterested in intellect, and I was enthused by books and reading. I spent most of my school experience outside of class time, escaped into a library, into the school library. And so there's that's the first part, this weird juxtaposition. But then there's also the doubt that exists in your head, the idea that I can't be. I am intellectually interested in the kind of cleverness of everything around me and learning, but I can't be that, because what I know about my identity is that other people believe it to be something that is incapable of this, not just won't excel, but incapable of this. And so it's not even genuine for me. Black smart people, you do see this a lot, right? Black smart people stop being black at some point. People say, actually, you are, I don't see you as a black person. I have people tell me that. It's like, wow, I'm 6'9" and 26 stone. I'm very surprised. I'm covered with black all the way head to toe, right? So it's that weird incongruence. How can I be clever whilst being black? How can I remain authentically black and be clever? Because Neil deGrasse Tyson didn't exist back then. Someone who seems to have integrated that quite fully. And the examples are not huge when you look around. I know a lot of really smart, bright black people. I was talking to Pete Olusoga, who's a sports psychologist, the other day, and I find that endlessly inspiring to see someone like him who's a lecturer in school and a proper psychologist. And yet at the same time, you look around sometimes and it is like hen's teeth to find examples of people who have integrated. And for Pete, he has dreads, right? So there's this idea that people have about him that he'd be a more appropriate psychologist if his hair was different. He has that conversation with people. So this constant battle, which of your identities should be supreme? Should your cleverness or your blackness or your gayness or your something else, which should be supreme? And I always felt like I could integrate them, but I'm still working on that.
I mean, it's such a hard thing to hear, John, because the idea that you should have to do that is not something that I can identify with being a woman and a psychologist and all, but that this is on a different level, and I'm not sure people really get that. Or if they do, they don't know how to talk about it, or they're scared of talking about it. And
I don't think we need to have this kind of pissing contest of it. I can't imagine the number of people who see Professor Alex Forsyth and know exactly who you're supposed to be. I know that this exists for lots of different people. I don't think we need to.
Well,
go on, please.
If I tell you that often I don't use Alexandra, I just put Alex. And I don't, because it's actually easier if people don't know that I'm a woman. And I get really surprised messages going, "Oh, you're a woman. I wasn't expecting a woman." Yep. And that happens more than it should.
What a lack of imagination for us, those psychologists, right? What a lack of imagination for us.
I was listening to your book in the hospital where you talk about, can you imagine that you're about to see the doctor? What's your vision of a doctor in your head? And I thought, and mine was still a man. And I didn't know it until you called it out.
Yeah. And we have to, and this is one of the things I'm clear on. This is not about unlearning this. It is simply about having that thought occur, intrusive or otherwise as it is, and then grabbing it before it escapes. Right? Imprisoning to make sure that what we present to the world, it's about, I have an eyebrow that tends to rise anytime I experience something that gets my attention. And part of my job is when something is different than I expect to not demonstrate that, because that's my first commitment to equity right there. That's my first commitment to an authentic relationship with somebody. So if I met you, well, when I did meet you, I was not surprised because I looked you up. But when I first met you, had I been surprised, it would have been my job, not yours, my job, to ensure that what you got was not, oh my God, a woman who's a professor, but rather something that enabled us to start a relationship off on the right foot. That's our job. It's all about jobs.
Well, speaking of relationships, I'm going to end on this because you say in your book that you show caring by giving quality time, and you talk about flying to your coach's retirement day and doing this kamikaze trip to go and see him. You've been really generous now with the ABP on a number of occasions. This is 2 times that we've had conversations and you've done talks. And I want to say that our members, we really appreciate the spotlight that you've shone on us and the generosity of your time and attention. And on that, I wondered if you had any kind of parting messages that you wanted to give to our members coming out of what I hope is COVID and into the next phase of whatever new normal is. I hate that word too, by the way.
Yes, good. I do. This is a pleasure to be engaged, not only with you, especially with you, but also with the community. I love this. We are disproportionately powerful. we need to remind each other of this. Some of you in your environments with maybe just starting off with a couple of clients, for each of those people, you are a giant. I want to make sure that we connect more, that we learn from each other. I know there's this wealth of information, of insight, of brilliance within this organization. I show up at the development sessions. I love that stuff. I hope that we get a chance to do more of that together, and especially as COVID recedes, maybe even shock horror, see each other in person.
Yes, that would be nice. That would be really good. Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Hannah will know.
Thank you so much for your really insightful talk. I'd like to invite everybody to think about what their key takeaways are, so that we can talk about these key takeaways, key messages, your thoughts and your feelings on John's talk later tomorrow in our networking sessions. So keep those with you. If you're a note taker, take notes. If not, just keep them in your head. But thank you so much, John, and thank you, Alex, as well, for joining us this morning.
And can I just say, is it too late? Does everybody go?
No.
Buy the book. Buy the book. Buy the book and listen to it on Audible. It's really great. Okay. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. If everyone else is able to join us in the next speaker session, so we've got Connection Technology with Juliet, and we also have Wellbeing with Dr. J.J. Kennedy. We've got Purpose with Nuala Walsh, and we've got Diversity with Eric Seidel from Modern Hire. So please choose the one that resonates most with you, and we'll see you there.